They had a lot of the ammunition and muskets stored right where you're walking over. So this street ran right through the fort.
So the fort was all...
That's such a great idea.
Right, and you'll see a picture of it on these signs. Yeah. That's the best storage of all. Okay. Get in as tight as you can. So I'm not sure how hard my voice carries, but if you could crowd around over on this side, come on up on this side. Yeah, come on up and bunch up on this side. So I don't know if anybody, you can see the street you walked over, right about here is this barracks. So this one barracks was right in the middle of the road.
Why'd they put it there?
I know.
Easy access.
Well, you know, one day you're going to be able to hold your cell phone up and look at things and put in the year, and it'll show the fort. I mean, they're doing that in New York City and some of the cities where you can just type in the year, and if they don't have a photograph, they have an artist's illustration of the site. And they'll map the whole world one day that way, if we survive. But across the street, those houses, they're only sitting on dirt because there's only two things we got left: the well and that dirt. Those houses sit over there because our men moved that dirt to make the logs that were sideways, to make it level. So in the back of all those houses, it's a bank terraced, and that's still from the dirt left over. And these are the barracks. The front of the fort is right at the wall of that Loudon Apartments, and you'll see a sign there. And it took them 2 years to build this fort, 1756 to 1758. And right at the same time at the Fort Frederick you went and saw, they were building it right around the same time. And some of you heard this before, but I like what the ranger said to me. He says, we may have the fort, but you have George Washington. So George Washington designed this fort. He made 2 designs of it. And there you can see those in the Smithsonian. It's all over the internet. So he designed it. And then come on over this way. We'll go by the well. Just noticed your Eagles hat. Go Eagles. I'm from the Philly area. So I was loving that game. That's what cheers. Yeah, that was going to be tough for you guys to watch.
Well, my wife is from Lansdale. So.
That Mahomes is still scary. He closed up the score real fast in the last 5 minutes of the game. Yeah, 40-6. And then 5 more minutes. Okay, this is like, we opened this up in like 2014. So there were no human eyes that looked down this well all the way back to the 1930s when this cement was put in. So, and they have steel girders in the cement, but they didn't put them evenly, so we had to kind of guess where we were going to drill our holes. And we ordered a sewer guy with his camera to go down into the water. So the well was 104 feet, and they got this miner, and you know, they were kind of careless in getting their names right, but there's like 10 journal entries of George Washington calling this Dutch guy by a different name and spelling his name differently each time. So, you know, as long as he was doing the well, and this guy had skill, because there's limestone bedrock underneath here. So they had to use black powder to blast this well out. And it took them the entire time they were building the fort to blast this well out. And it goes down, you know, like I say, 104 feet. There's 75 feet of water in it. So you can look it up on the internet. I made a little scary video of it. It's scary. That's about it. But he had his own people. It was very like a European guild. It's like nobody mess with this. It's just his people that are helping him. Because you couldn't trust anybody. Everybody that was in this army, they were like a landlubber at sea. They really didn't have wilderness skills back then. They just knew how to drink. So, and that's where they got most of them. You know, they'd go, the guy who was made foreman, who superintended the building of this fort, he gets in a fight in a Fredericksburg bar while he's recruiting, and he took one punch and killed a man. I've read that a lot, where one punch can kill you. You know, I don't even know how they do that extreme boxing, but one punch can kill you. And I've read that in many news articles. Here's a guy who's an example of that. And he learned, but he was really worried about the, you know, they were very legalistic. There were a lot of lawsuits, court martials. You know, you were in court a lot. And that was a fact of life, because, you know, everybody was always owing everybody. And, you know, back then you really know what money is. What's money? A promise to pay. So they're writing these IOUs, these promissory notes to each other, and keeping a journal of it. So that was their money. They're handing you an IOU, he's selling the IOU to somebody else. Just like hedge funds do today. You know, they get all these non-paying mortgages, package it together, say there's some interest income coming in on them, and they sell it. But that's what they were doing, promissory notes. That was the money, the main money between especially the gentry. So that's how you passed, you know, trading. But lieutenants, the foreman that did this fort, he learned how to build forts on the South Branch of the Potomac. Not sure why they couldn't have given that river a better name, but the South Branch, in fact, it splits, so it's the South Branch of the South Branch of the Potomac. But he learned how to build forts all along there. And so there were probably maybe, you know, there's actually 100 forts in the Virginia frontier area that they built. And these guys did like a T route from this fort. They go out to Great North Mountain on 50, you know, pretty much following Indian Hollow Road to get out there. And then they'd go out to Fort Edwards. Then they'd go out to this fort that was in Romney, West Virginia. And then they'd go down to the South Branch and up the branch. Then they'd go to Fort Ashby and then to Fort Cumberland. They were constantly moving around. They didn't sit around a lot. So but the guy who did design this fort, he was having trouble doing something I think called an embouchure or whatever, how you angle in where the cannon holes come out. And he was writing George Washington that. And even by the end of 1758, while they're constructing this fort, where you guys crossed over was the southwest bastion. That started to crumble. There's rock under there, and it started to crumble, so they had to shore that up. So by the time they finished working on it, it was kind of ramshackle a little bit. What lasted to the 1830s was the barracks on this side. There was a barracks here, and it was called the Oyster House. And I'm always intrigued about oysters. Did your parents eat a lot of oysters?
Nope.
No? Did you ever hear of that? Grandparents. Oysters are big. You dig in the ground, there's oyster shells everywhere. And clay pipes, broken clay pipes. But my grandparents and parents, you know, they ate a lot of oysters. Anyway, there's an oyster bar, oyster that takes over the barracks here. And that painted yellow, and it was one of the last barracks to remain, so it stayed quite a while. They had about 16 cannon at this fort, and if you walk over here, you're going to see how fat these walls are. You all are sitting inside the wall. That side is the outer wall, this is the inner wall. And all of this was filled up with dirt and rock. So when that cannonball hit the wall, it would go. They'd have to do a lot of cannonballs to start shoving that dirt out of there. And even then, with all those cannonballs, they'd still have a lot of dirt to hide behind. So it was actually a better fort than that one that remains today, that stone fort, Fort Frederick. Although they won't believe me when I tell the park rangers that. So, and right here, so the barracks, and right behind you, under that person's kitchen, is George Washington designed a sally port, meaning it was like a hidden door, and they would sally out of there, freaking out the enemy while they're trying to get a second shot on you. So you might be 3/4 of the way while they're trying to reload up. So they would surprise. So they figured the French would show up on that ridge. And before they built this barracks, you could see this the Civil War place across the street there. But that's the ridge where they thought the French would show up to set up a cannon. Starfort?
No, that's our way.
Just on that ridge. Starfort's further out.
That's Jackson's headquarters.
Yeah, we got some Civil War experts in here. So has anybody ever gone over to that house? Yeah. All right, but yeah, that's the sally port that he designed, and the whole hole of that, the remains of the fort are still underneath that kitchen. We crawled in there, and the second guy that crawled in there, you have to crawl on your belly to get in there. And then you go down this rock cave thing down in there. The second guy who followed me in there was 80 years old. I'm like, you're getting the Tunnel Rat Award. So 16 feet high. Were these, look how fat these walls are, right? They're going up 16 feet high. They're tapering in towards the top. So that's pretty high. When we walk across the street, you might get a peek, and then you have a person standing on top of that 16 feet. So you can see Signal Knob on Massanutten Mountain from here.
Wow.
You just see the tips of it above the trees. So it had quite a view. So and they did the logs. There were 16 of them. They had to be a foot wide, and they were squared off. They were square logs, squared out, hewn logs, as they say. and they ran sideways. But you know, before the internet and guys in pajamas figuring out the truth off the internet, you had to do some really horsework going to the libraries to find out the truth. You know, it was a lot of work. And it was hit or miss if you found it at the library. So for 30 years almost, there was a wrong model of this fort, which still exists today, that was at the George Washington Office Museum, and it shows it with the logs going up and down, like a palisade. It's really well done. It's worth keeping just because it was a big lie. But even mythology is good to have. Yeah, and now I believe it's at Laurel Ridge Community College. I haven't tracked that down yet. But it was there for a long time, advertising. And then I sort of wanted to give it a little credit because this fort site had a second act. First act was French and Indian, second act is Rev War. So in the War of Independence, there were 3 sets of prisoners during the War of Independence that were coming here. And we got a famous one, Wiederhold, who was a Swiss mercenary, but in with the Hessians. He was captured in Trenton on the Christmas raid across the Delaware. So he comes here, and he's famous for mapping out towns. He walked the steps of this town to such an exact degree. When you put the modern street lines on, he's got them all down pat. And he did the first real map of this town in 1777. But they took a lot of those Hessians they captured at Trenton down here to Winchester. And he was allowed to walk freely because if he went east, he'd be captured by those rebel loyalists, or the rebels, not patriots, rebels. Or if they run west, the Indians would get him. They were still afraid of all those Indian stories they were told. So they hung out in town. And also a lot of them had to pay for their way. And the population really liked having free labor. So the officers paid for their quarters, and usually it was just the privates or the lessers that were held here at this fort during the War of Independence. So, but he walked freely this town. He did a great job. The only other map of this town before that was the founder of the town and Lord Fairfax. When they put in their plaque designs to enlarge the town. Those are the only maps prior to that of this town. So, but we had prisoners before this in the French and Indian War, LaForce, they say everybody in France is related to Martel, that the Hammer King, but they captured him, and they had another French prisoner that came through here, and he was called a Gascon by Washington. And if you look at an old map of France, there's an area like in Aquitaine, Gascony, on the eastern side of France. Well, the Gascons were known as liars. So Washington called it, I think he is a Gascon. And to this day, Gascon, France has a Liars Festival. So am I lying or not? But this guy was, he told a lot of tall tales. So they just couldn't, get good reconnaissance out of him. So those are the two, those two famous French prisoners that were interrogated here. But he got captured, this guy, and up near Turtle Creek near Pittsburgh, because when the Cherokee Allies, there were like 400 Cherokee Allies in one day came here to this fort. And they had a 3-day debate where they didn't know if they were going to kill the Virginia regiment or go home. So they debated. They were all very angry because it was the classic World War II FUBAR saying. They told these Cherokee that the presents were left for you in Williamsburg. And they also told them they were here too. So Wawahachi, one of the big warriors of the Cherokee, he's like, you're telling me the presents are Williamsburg? I was already there. They're not there. They told me it was here. So they argued for 3 days what they were going to do. And finally they decided to take the Virginia Regiment guy's word, you know, that the presence will be here when you come back from your skirmishing out towards the Fort Duquesne. And of course, Captain Mercer, who's aide-de-camp to the Colonel Washington, writes to Washington, look, you got to cover me, because when they get back here, I'm going to be gone. He's going to South Carolina to help out South Carolina. I'm going to be gone. And if there's no presents, you're going to have a big revolt. So, and of course, there were no presents when they came here, so Washington had to bear the heat. And you ought to read some of those letters. He didn't think he was going to get out of that situation alive. He had to do a little tap dancing. So, a lot of those Cherokee, you will read in the Cherokee Wars, because after they left Winchester, they told Virginia Regiment, if we're not going to get our presents, we're going to take our horses and take what we want, because that's what you promised. So on their way back, they took a few horses. Now, there were a lot of horses that were straggling around. They weren't penned in. So they took horses, and there were skirmishes against the Cherokee by the locals all the way back to the Smokies. And that eventually coalesced into the Cherokee War, where we turned against our allies. But when we got that French prisoner here, the Gascon Liar, Swallow was one of the big warriors. And they came upon these French guys and their Indians. And he, in midair, they described this, in midair, he's ready to tomahawk the French soldier. French soldier's down below him and shoots him in the head. And they shoot his son in both legs. So they got to run, and they figured, and they took they took some Indians and took some Frenchmen. They would have had 4 Frenchmen, but they got killed because the Indians took revenge for Swallow being killed and the son being wounded like that. So they hauled all the way back here on a run for 2.5, 3 days. And they said they wouldn't have survived if it wasn't for spring onions. Anybody ever eat any spring onions? And they were carrying Swallow's son on their shoulder all the way back. They didn't stop because they figured there would be a revenge party. And you know, when you read these letters, anybody read Founders Online? Founders Online is chock full of letters of all our founders and all this stuff. But when you read these letters, a lot of the horror of that stuff, it's pretty dramatic reading. But check out Founders Online. It's excellent. All right. So, anybody have anything to add or questions? Any Civil War experts in here?
Define expert.
Well, okay. Well, you know a little. This, by the way, I said this has 2 acts. This site has 3 acts. Across, down that road, and that house over there fed the Confederate stragglers from the Battle of Gettysburg all day long. Soup, eggs, bread, all day long. Was a long line of stragglers coming through here. James Taylor was an artist, and he drew a picture of this well. He was fascinated with all the French and Indian War stories here. So he was like Columbo, noodling around, checking everything out, you know, to find out what happened. He was just impressed with the story of Washington here. But he was an artist embedded with Sheridan on the Union side. But he has pictures all up and down the valley, but he was here and drew a picture of a Union soldier by this well.
When did the fort disappear?
Pretty much like 1820s, 30s was the oyster bar, was this one barrack here, and that was painted yellow.
And the walls?
The walls are starting to depart. People are taking them to build houses downtown. And you would know some of the houses have the
Hey, ask you, you started talking about that oyster house, the yellow house.
yeah.
Wasn't there a story for a while that some people maintained it was moved into town somewhere?
Yeah, they on Peyton Street right below us. One of the houses there has some of that wood from that barrack. Yeah, technically, all the barracks could have housed 500 sardine men. But they really never had that many at one given time, because they were constantly moving between forts. Washington did not like this whole defense plan. He was like, this is a waste of money building all these forts, moving around. They're just going to go in between us. So he was all about offense. We just got to, you know, this whole fort and everything about this town is all because of Fort Duquesne. That's why when you go down to the corner of George Washington Office Museum on Braddock and Cork, there's a cannon that's pointing towards Pittsburgh. This whole thing is all about Fort Duquesne. All right. Any other questions?
Jim, you started to talk about Indian Alley.
Oh yeah, it ain't named Indian Alley for nothing. So one day, well, there was a letter where a drummer and a sergeant had to march through the street and say, there's Catawba coming up. And be careful what you say, because they know English. And also, don't feed them any rum. The Indians mostly went along Indian Alley to put their horses and stash their stuff. So that's what they ran up and down. There might be a casino there. That's how we pay it back. Here's a casino.
Did you ever taking them down over the hill to see the backside with the
Yeah,
with the
we could
remains
do
of it?
that.
You wanted to
Yeah,
see that?
yeah.
You can show them.
I mean, you're going to just see a hill, but that's our soil that our men labored hard at.